The topic is the recent social unrest towards the police, racism in America, and how we can help. On today's episode, you will hear the perspectives of Vincent and how we can help. On today's episode, you will hear the perspectives of Vincent Piscasio, a black student who shares his experiences, Max Banach, the Vice President of Debate and Speech and Debate, and Drew Stoneburner, President of the Sarasota Teen Republican Club. Before we begin, you may hear things in this podcast you disagree with, and before getting upset, think and reflect on what you've heard. Many of our thoughts and intentions aren't so different from each other. With that being said, I'm your host, Brian Zhang, and let's open our minds. Nuggets with Vincent Piscasio. All right, welcome to the show, Vincent Piscasio. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. I hope I got that kind of right. Yeah. So let's just go ahead and jump right into it. So actually, what do you think about the whole looting that's been going on?
They're not, I don't think they're part of the protests, and that kind of leads back to my opinion on their media portrayal, where in some cases I see the media is grouping them all into one cause based off of the death of George Floyd, when in reality I think they're two separate things and they should be grouped together. And I do think looting is wrong, but at the same time it's getting the attention towards the protest.
It is, and that's why I feel like it's so there's so many sides to look at. Like I've heard people talking about how the actual looters aren't a part of the protest, and they're actually white supremacists
taking advantage of the situation for their own benefit.
Yeah, and it's absolutely awful. But again, as you were saying, like the looting and the burning or whatever, it is bringing attention, and it's hard to put it on like a moral standpoint, right? Because on one hand, like remember Kaepernick and taking the kneel, that was peaceful, like no one was harmed in doing that, but there was a very big public outrage from that.
Yeah, and then what ended up happening, it was, he's disrespecting the flag, and then the players started joining arms. I know I think the San Francisco team did that as well instead of kneeling, and they still got the same type of backlash. They're disrespecting the flag. Our veteran, how?
Yeah,
it's not like they're burning the flag, which people make a big deal out of. He's just kneeling.
Mm-hmm. And so, like, what do you do if a peaceful thing is not going to work, right? You're gonna riot.
That's another thing. We've been peacefully protesting throughout all time, and this is the one thing that is getting everyone's attentions now, because through peaceful protests you may have not been getting kind of like the media attention, I don't want to say respect, but I guess the notoriety of the movement, like the cause. And then now people are I guess angry, and then this is the outcome.
Yeah, actually, have you been to any of the protests?
I have not. I've been quarantining for the
Okay. Yeah, same. That's actually another thing, because like it's crazy how this is happening during the coronavirus. So like we have this global pandemic and people are out. So
I watched I think I read an article about how as soon as the death of George Floyd happened, and you start to see like the ripple effects of it, it's like the coronavirus kind of just disappeared, and then this became, which I completely understand and respect, but at the same time, lives are at stake on a more global scale.
Yeah, it's absolutely crazy what's going on. Like, and that's one thing about the media, because the media is showing, I think the media is just showing such different sides of what's going on. So, so they're showing the lootings and whatnot. And they're saying like, oh, these protesters are, they're insane, they're violent. And I don't know if you saw it, but have you seen like that thing talking about like the pile of bricks that are just like laying around?
I don't understand that. Is that, yeah.
Yeah, so like there's some other people, like some other organization that's like in the shadows, who are just like setting these things up to like incite violence. Really? So yeah, at least that's what they're saying, because like there's no reason for those bricks to be there, and they're so well placed and organized.
I thought that it was someone read that it was like the cops who were setting it up.
Yeah, that's like that. Yeah. That's the question. No one knows who's doing it. And like I read another thing talking about how the first Target in Minneapolis, they got looted. It was actually a police officer who like broke that first window.
So they're inciting violence. Oh my gosh.
Well, that's the thing, because like with the media, I feel like especially now in like the past few years, it's so hard to trust them. So like, was it actually the police? you
So
know?
are they playing on our mistrust in order to like incite these riots and these lootings, and then putting the blame on the protesters?
Yeah, I think that's definitely like a discussion to be had. Like, how is the media affecting the truth? Basically, how are they twisting it? Because no one can really confirm or deny. I think right now that like, did a police officer break that first window? Did they set up the bricks?
At this point, I think we're way beyond that. It's like a wider scale.
Yeah,
It's not
but the
just in
point
the
is, yeah, and like, but the point is that there still is violence going on.
hmm
So, the question is, how do we fix that? And Trump is saying like, having the military, which is, yeah.
militarizing the police and even bringing in the military, while it may stop the protest, isn't going to stop the unrest in this country.
Yeah, there's
I
still
think
so
that's
much. Yeah, there's so much tension in the Black community
Mhm.
about what's going on, brutality. This question may seem like a bit more personal, so you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but
Yeah,
do you feel that you've experienced discrimination?
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Definitely, especially with where kind of, and I maybe Brian, you can relate to this, especially like the town you and I are living in right now, where it's mostly it's like a white majority
And
and
old.
white and old, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of a history, not even in history, but I guess I want to say latency, and they're not necessarily taking action because it's the majority. We're appeasing the majority and not anyone else. Um,
Yeah.
Personally, I also feel in my experience, it's been a lack of education of other people on their part that has put me in the situations that I've been in, that has led to, racist remarks towards myself,
Hmm.
or racist actions or thought, like all of that. And I think it's a lack of education in this country on, the effects of, as you and I have been talking about, systemic racism and its effects, because no one really understands unless you're educated about it.
Yeah, and I think going on to education, it's so important that people actually understand systemic racism. Because I feel that it's very hard for people to recognize because it's so ingrained into the current culture,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think a big part of that has to do with media portrayal. So you know
Yeah.
how a lot of movies and whatnot, they're showing these black people are criminals,
Mm-hmm.
or like even not like just like black people. It goes in like all kinds of cultures, like you know Mexicans are all like
This is
illegal.
in like Hollywood movie portrayals.
Yeah, like in Hollywood or like the
So
media.
that's actually funny. So the other day, my mother and I were watching Top Gun,
Oh,
and
Top Gun, it's so good. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
and she was telling me about how at the end they were gonna portray, at least I don't want to spoil it, but the fighter pilots were, I want to say, Korean, and
Yeah.
then and those were the, I guess, the antagonists for the movie.
Hmm.
And at the end of it, she was telling me, when they released the movie in China, in that part of the world, there was this uproar because, oh, why are our people the bad, like represented in a negative way in this movie? And they ended up
Uh,
changing it, but only for like the Western kind of hemisphere.
wow. Oh, that's so
So I thought that was
interesting.
really interesting.
Yeah. And like another thing about that is that like one big thing that affects it is money and the economics behind it.
Yeah,
Like for example, Asia is like, I think is like 60% of like the movie market. They're huge consumers of
it's a
movies.
big market, and you want to tap it so you get more gain from it. But
Yeah. And it's also like the media as well. It's like, they're not probably going to make much money by showing, the peaceful protests that actually happen going on. Like Sarasota, nothing's happened here.
they're not going to get the views that they want, to
Yeah.
keep the revenue incoming. But
Yeah, and you see like a Target getting smashed and like burned, like whoa,
and
whoa.
yeah, and then in that instance, it's up to the kind of two dominant sides of American politics to decide what that means,
Hmm.
right? So on maybe a conservative side, it's oh, the looters and the protesters are one group, and maybe on the liberal side, the looters and protesters are two separate groups, but the looters are still on the negative end of the spectrum. So it kind of it's a play on like perspective. You asked me what my experience was with racism. Do
Yeah,
you have an experience to share?
I guess for me, there's okay. So for Asians in general, I feel like we're very much represented as like a model minority, right? We're basically looked at to, work hard and grind all the time. We would basically do whatever it takes, that kind of thing, and that we're already naturally very talented. And I think
Yeah.
that's something that affects that does affect a lot of Asian Americans a lot. Like, for example, me specifically, right? I'm not good at math. I'm not particularly good at math, I should say. Like pre-calc, I remember when I did that and like the unit circle first came up, I was like, are you serious?
Memorizing all that, yeah.
Yeah, but like this mainly applied to me when I was younger. But when I was younger and like I wouldn't know how to do something, people would be like, "Oh, you're Asian, you're Chinese, aren't you supposed to
You'll
know this?" And
figure
I'm
it out,
like, "Yeah," and I'm
right?
like, "No, I don't know how to do this." And I see it a lot in like young kids because this actually happened like just a few months ago when I was volunteering for Kids Night Out at school.
Yeah.
But like some like this little girl, she like walked up to me and like she like did the thing where you put your finger to your eyes and just
Oh,
like go like
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, and it was just like ching chong, and I was like, what? What? So like it's amazing, and I think that like that's a point that people bring up when
How
they
old was
say
she?
she was a fourth grader, I think.
Oh, okay. I'm thinking like eighth grade.
Yeah, no. At least
Okay.
I think so. I don't know for sure. She seemed pretty young though. But I think that's a point that people bring up where they say that like racism isn't inherent. It's something that's
Race won't
taught.
have an age. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that, there really should be some more proper education
Yeah.
on like how to treat people, right?
Yeah. So mine, the earliest I can remember happened at our school.
Yeah.
It was the first week of second grade,
Oh boy.
and it happened to be land on my birthday, which so I knew this kid since pre-K. He and I were really good friends, and we're in the playground playing. We're chasing each other.
Yeah.
He wants to introduce his friend, but he introduces me to the friend, and I'm like,
Okay.
"Hi, can I play with you guys?" And he looks at my friend and he goes, "He can't play with us. He's black."
What? Oh my
Second grade.
God. Second grade.
And you know what else funny? It turns out the kid is Jewish.
Ah.
So that doesn't make sense on how two people who kind of share, in a sense, like a struggle.
Yeah.
Like that's what he immediately, the group he puts me in with.
Yeah.
Is that
Wow.
is
Yeah, that's
instead of like, oh,
awful.
I don't like his attitude, or maybe he doesn't treat my friends well. It's just you're black. He can't play with us.
Mm-hmm. And that's something that people have been talking about. Like, there's kind of there's like this identity battle where people are saying like, I'm more oppressed than you. Like, not I'm not saying that's what they're saying, but that's the attitude that some people have, and it's ridiculous. So yeah, Asians, Jewish Americans, Mexicans, blacks, we all face our own kind of issues, and just from being different than what the normal
What
is.
the consensus is exactly.
Yeah.
And then also it becomes like how we fit our stereotypes. Like if we're not fit in their box, we're different and we need to be taken care of. And I'm not saying in a radical sense, but in kind of go back to your country, or you don't belong here, in that type of sense.
Yeah. It's really it's
like
yeah.
if especially Brian, at our school, if we're not conforming to what they think we are, then we're just different. Like if, like you kind of said, you're not the best at math, maybe their box for you is he needs to be good at math, he needs to be good at something like that.
Yeah.
I think that's strange.
It definitely, yeah. It's like stereotypes in general are just like they're very destructive.
Happen.
Yeah.
It's gonna happen.
But it's all about trying to find a way to hopefully change
just keep
that.
Your head up through it. That's what I've learned.
Yeah. That's another thing. There's like it's kind of hard to differentiate what we can change society from like a societal perspective and from our own individual perspective. So there's some things that society can do to help alleviate some situations. Like, for example, like police brutality, like that can be changed through legislation. If like more training, we'll probably see a lot less of it, but hopefully at least. But there is still that that responsibility yourself to basically say, I'm not going to take this, I'm going to show that I deserve a place here and my own strength through my like open-mindedness and my, my positivity.
Brian, have there ever been things that have happened to you that you just maybe turned a blind eye to?
I would say yes to that, but yeah, I feel like there's, like the term microaggression.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a lot of those that happen towards, like us minorities, that it's been so common in society that you're kind of just like, okay, whatever, when it happens.
I do that where someone will say something to me that is inherently wrong,
Yeah.
and just maybe to diffuse the situation, at that point in time, I act like I didn't hear it, or act like I just don't care.
Mm-hmm.
But then I think about it, and I wonder if that makes me part of the problem, where I'm acting like, or I'm giving tolerance to this type of attitude,
By
and
not
that
speaking up.
yeah, not even speaking
Yeah.
up, just like saying how it actually makes me feel, or what I think of what they're doing or saying. Does that make me part of the problem?
Yeah, and
That's what I think about it. Yeah.
I feel like a part of that goes into our own fears of being like socially alienated. Like no one really likes the kind of person who just goes off on everyone for
Yeah.
everything. While those things should not have been said in the first place, they're so common that I think most people, they don't really think about it. It kind of just
It just
kind of just like
happens.
they
Yeah.
say it. So is it their fault? Partially yes, but it's just like because it's so common in society and it's been taught to be whatever, that they'll say it. And like, of course, maybe we want to speak up about that. We want to say like, hey, what you said, that that kind of hurt me, or like that was not okay. But we don't want if they're our friend or something, we don't want them to be like, okay, dude,
To think
and
that
like
like maybe we
back
can't
up.
take a joke, or
Yeah.
things like that.
Yeah. And yeah, that's why some people, when they say like, oh, it's just a joke, dude, like,
So like, oh, you and I are buddies. I can tell you this, but at the same time, like, if I wasn't me, or you and I weren't friends, would you still be saying it to me?
yeah. Yeah.
Like, would you feel comfortable enough to say that? Like, all this stuff.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, there's definitely, it has to be fixed from a societal and our own individual perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. Do you have any closing remarks?
Stay safe. Don't catch coronavirus. And wear your mask when you leave the house.
All right. Thank you so much, Vincent. Nuggets with Max Banach. Okay. Welcome to the show, Max. How have you been?
Hi, Brian. It's gone pretty good. Pretty good.
Awesome. One thing I want to say before we get started is that I'm very, very happy that you sent me a document with all your research.
Of course.
It's really nice to know that, there's some effort being put into knowing what's going on. I really appreciate that. Yeah. So
building off that, I just want to get this out of the way. I see there's a lot of activism on like social media networks, and there's like a conversation going on, but I don't feel there's necessarily a discourse about the solutions to the problems that people are talking about. So I was hoping we could address that today.
Yeah, actually, let's go ahead and start about that. Because one thing I feel that I'm seeing on social media, one thing I think that things like Instagram and Twitter, whatever, that is really helping out is that we're in like a new age of activism, right? Because we never had these kind of things beforehand. Like, it'd all just be in the newspaper or whatever. And now with anyone being able to post what they see or what they hear and what they want to say, it's really amazing. But one thing that I feel especially disconnected with, I mean, I think we can call it a civil rights movement for this time, at least compared to the one way back in like the 70s, that like during that kind of time, we had people like, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. We had like, there was actual leader with actual ideas.
Yeah, centralized person.
That we could stand behind, yeah. And we don't really have that today, at least not right now. So tell me what you think about that, or how we can fix that.
One of the issues that's happening right now that didn't necessarily happen back then in the 60s and kind of in the Ferguson riots in 2014 is there wasn't really an election year. And now that we're on the doorstep of November, I think we're kind of defaulting to like the Biden figure in this scenario. But the issue is he's such a faulty character in the sense of his past record with civil rights. And he brings up like his previous legislative acts, but if you actually like delve into like the crime bill, it disproportionately affected the people he's trying to advocate for now in 2020. So
yeah, I actually don't know too much about that. So can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, so essentially the 94 crime bill, it on a federal level, it allocated much more funding to like local police departments.
Like the whole rubber bullets and like the shooting people and like they have these awful injuries. So I think
if I could just talk on
go
the
ahead.
rubber bullets points, my current understanding is they're not actually supposed to be like directly targeted at protesters. They're supposed to be like bounced off the ground, and yet we have the riot police actually shooting them directly at the protesters, and we've seen, I know, at least 2 instances where protesters have actually lost their eyes.
Yeah, those actually, I think it was an ABC reporter who lost her eye from getting shot, which I think brings up the question: is it the lack of training? Are they not taught with rubber bullets, or do they actually just have the intent to harm these people and just like shoot them?
Yeah, so that's 2 things that I get on later in the doc, but essentially we don't have enough training for the police officers in these specific scenarios. Like obviously you don't have riots every day. That comes at like a fundamental fault in like the police hiring system, because since not enough people want to be police, they're hiring anyone essentially. So you see in LA, since there's a higher crime rate in LA compared to like the average city, they're like advertising for people to join the police force, and then you have people joining.
Oh yeah, I saw some of those signs.
They're not necessarily like fit for the role of a police officer. And then you have these scenarios where they're acting out of either instinct, but they're not trained. It's not like the Marines where you have, buds, and they're being trained and it weeds out like the people who aren't meant for it. You don't have that for the police force.
Yeah, it's really crazy because like if someone just thinks like, oh, I want to go out there and shoot some people, they could just go to the police and they're like, okay. And what's really interesting about the police is that this is something that I've been seeing a lot, and I think that's something that does have some merit to it, is that when the police are there against the protesters, it really does create a very different power dynamic because they have the weapons, you know, in some places, even the National Guard is there. So they got even bigger weapons, is even more of a power discrepancy. And I think it's kind of similar to like the Stanford prison experiment, you know, where they have so much power and these people
authority.
They
generate a sort of power complex, you could say.
It does. And they're just beating up these protesters with it. So I think that kind of connects to like the whole like all cops are bad ACAB thing.
So
what are you saying on that?
So we can roll into that. So let me try and find where, because I had one piece of evidence that I found. So like you have like 2 sides of the story. You have ACAB, and then you have like there's only a few bad apples. And obviously the real truth is somewhere on the in between. There's not every choice is like I'm not bipolar, but like
black
there's
and white.
Like 2 options. Yeah, black and white essentially. So this says, so researchers examined 8,600 Chicago police force officers with multiple files complaints between 05 and 17, and they found that more officers with histories of excessive force were in a group, so they were assigned to like a patrol group or something. The higher the risk that the officers in the group would develop similar track records. So it lends credence to the idea that like all cops are bad, but the issue is it's not just a few bad apples that are causing this. It's like the influence that you have on the police force as a whole. It's like a root issue.
Yeah,
and that really
spreading.
Exactly. So that ties into the solutions. And the big problem in this scenario is actually the police unions, because the contracts that police officers have with the police department are negotiated by the union, and they have purposely vague language regarding these complaints about brutality, assault by the police officers, and it leads to these complaints in most cases not being investigated. So you see the person who murdered George Floyd, the officer, he had over 15 complaints against him, and yet he was still on the force. And we also see that the knee tactic that he used on Floyd, it was against the Minneapolis police office rules, but yet he still used it. And there were multiple other instances where it had happened.
Yeah, and think about it, there's actually one that happened in Sarasota a few years ago, which is
I heard that.
Yeah, so it's so wild. And like now that the tactic was used on George Floyd, and now there's so much more light on the brutality, it's being brought up again. And you know, I think he's being charged right now. I'm not sure. I haven't checked recently.
Yes, so the police officer himself was charged with he was upped from 3rd-degree murder, which is essentially manslaughter. It's unique to the state of Minnesota, to 2nd-degree murder. And then the other 3 officers were charged, I think either yesterday or the day before, with not aiding and abetting, but being part of the murder.
Oh, so it's a lesser charge?
It is a lesser charge because they didn't actually kill him, but they were complicit in the action.
Yeah, and that's like another thing, because you know, these cops, like, they should have a duty if they see like one of their people, you know, beating up this guy, like George Floyd, like 8 minutes 46 seconds. That's a huge amount of time.
Exactly.
That is so long, and like
Yeah,
it's
and
just crazy that they didn't do anything about it the whole time.
yeah, that ties in with the upping to the second-degree murder charge, because initially people were like, well, we have to keep it at third degree because you might not have enough evidence to up it to second degree. But if you think about it, the requirement between third and second-degree murder is that there was an intent to kill. So if you accidentally get in a car accident and kill someone, that's manslaughter because you didn't mean to. But in this case, since it was 8 minutes, he had expressed intent because he could have stopped along the way.
Yeah. So actually, just to clarify, what's the difference between like manslaughter and third degree murder, or are they like the same
So
thing?
yeah, okay. So manslaughter and third degree murder are the same. It's just a third degree murder is a term specifically used in Minnesota. Is my current understanding.
Oh, I see. I think there's a lot of people talking about defunding the police and allocating those funds to other, you know, like public transport, or some people are even talking about like if we take out the police force entirely, we could have free college, which is just like amazing to think about. But anyway, at least me, I don't really understand that argument too much. There definitely does have to be reform for the police, though, especially in training. And I think
you just
you can go on. No, you can go on.
Okay, it's kind of like people like said to like abolish the border patrol, and it's like,
ICE.
Well, ICE, and it's like abolish ICE, and it's like, well, what would you replace it with? Who would enforce our current laws? Because you could say, well, the people, there's still a duty to be done, and if you abolish the police force, then what would happen? Like you could say, oh, you have community policing, like a neighborhood watch, but you can't have a neighborhood watch everywhere, and it's like, you have problems and then you have solutions, and then you need a means between the solution and the problem. And then people they see the problem is the police because of the police brutality, and they say, we stop the problem by stopping it entirely. We get rid of the police. But they're not thinking of like the legislation and actions that can be done in between the two to bring the problem to a solution.
Yeah, I agree. And one thing is that like people talking about community watches, neighborhood watches, or whatnot, is that if you're taking down the police, I think it emphasizes another thing, and that would be the Second Amendment. I think that if you're going to lower police, it puts more accountability on the people and to watch over themselves and their neighbors, which I think will definitely lead to a whole lot more, you know, gun sales or whatever. Like, let's just say, like theoretically, the police were entirely abolished.
We've already seen an increase in gun sales in the past.
Yeah, but that was due to coronavirus, not necessarily the riots,
because of the riots. No, it is because of the riots.
What was the stat that you saw?
Here, let me pull it up.
Okay, because I remember I saw one for like a few months back about from the corona causing gun sales go up like 300-something%.
Anyway, it's increased. I can't find the figure right now, but it has increased because of the riots, because people are scared, like what would happen to them.
Yeah,
like,
and you can't blame them.
Bystanders who, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but one thing about that is then it creates even less accountability, because now everyone has a gun. You know, if for example, if I I should say let's say like someone shoots another person, like you can't just, you know, what are you gonna do? Just shoot them again? You know, there has to be someone to be held accountable, and for that the police can be held accountable.
Exactly. Like, what's better, police with minimal training on these issues, or people with firearms with no training on policing? Like, those are the two options when you abolish police entirely.
Yeah, and it also just escalates situations entirely, because once that gun comes out, it becomes life or death.
Exactly.
Just like police training in general. What was it? I think there's a stat that says they only have 10 hours of like mental health training in terms of like identifying if the other person has a mental illness.
That could be true. I think it's up to the department, if I'm thinking correctly.
Yeah, it's definitely based off the department. But what you can see though for sure is that the United States as a whole has a whole lot less hours of training required to actually start going out there than other countries in the world. Like Abu Dhabi, I believe you need like over 1,000 hours, which is more than I have in like CSGO. It's insane.
Yeah.
And also like you see the cops in like Dubai, they're driving like Lamborghinis, you know, it's like a Michael Bay movie every day in there. So, and you don't hear anything about brutality or like,
well, they have different laws in the Middle East.
They have different laws, and some of them are more questionable than others.
Yeah,
but just there should be more training.
It's true. Yeah. So And then one of the things that people talk about training, like increased training, well, what kind of training? And one of the common faults that people do, it's like, oh, bias training. Like, did you see the video of, like, I think it was the Canadian police officers that were watching um, um, Zootopia as bias training?
What?
Yeah, they
What?
they made the police force watch Zootopia, and
Wow.
one of the figures I have, like, there are two things, like two common solutions that actually don't work in the case of police brutality, and one of them is bias training, because the studies that I was looking at, there might be like a short term like effect on police brutality, but in the long term, like, bias training doesn't really work because in it biases are in your mind, and the bias training isn't changing that. So they just revert
Yeah.
back to their previous behavior.
But there's a statement that I think is definitely applicable, and that's racism isn't inherited. It's something that's taught and something that's
It's
seen.
learned. It's learned. Yeah. So I actually had from one of the papers I was looking at. Let me try and find that. It was talking about where people learn these biases. All right, right. Okay, so right here. So, because the stimulus is inextricably tied to the American experience, implicit biases are widespread, and there's no reason to think that police officers would be immune to them. In fact, studies have shown that in ambiguous experimental settings, officers were more likely to shoot hypothetical African American suspects than identified white suspects. Such biases are magnified when split second decision making is called for, as often when police officers must decide whether or not to shoot someone.
Yeah,
And it goes on to
it's
say that
horrible.
these biases are thought to emerge on a cultural level through a repeated exposure to movies, television, news coverage, and popular culture that presents Blacks and other minority racial groups in an unflattering or stereotypical light. So we can't say, like, ACAB, all cops are bad. We have to think, well, why are they bad? And it's because of the societal issues. And the only way to change society is through real change, not just advocating for a cause and hoping that something happens. You need
Mhm.
solutions.
That's absolutely true. But you got to think though that the media and these movies or whatnot, they're portraying blacks as criminals, right? Or whatever. You got to think
Yeah,
that
exactly.
there is, not saying an accuracy, but there's a reasoning behind that. Like for example, one of the biggest contributing things I think was redlining way back then,
Yes,
like
yes.
segregating the white neighborhoods and the black neighborhoods,
It's a big
which
issue.
absolutely caused huge amounts of crime in those black areas,
In the
which makes
ghettos.
sense
Yeah,
because they didn't have those kind
yeah,
of opportunities. They had to find other
yeah.
ways. And because of that, that led to the media portraying them, which led to everyone believing this is the case. So there's a
Exactly.
history behind it there, and it definitely is a systemic thing, which is
Hmm.
why that I think that systemic racism definitely does exist.
Hmm. And just to move on from what I was talking about with the bias training, one of the other things, like, people talk about body cameras, which was a big thing I think after Ferguson too. Is
Hmm.
like, well, everyone needs body cameras, right?
Yeah,
Well, you saw in this case with George Floyd, they had body cameras, but they weren't turned on because the officers had the choice to turn them on and off. So they don't really promote accountability. And right here, so this study showed, like, across 70 empirical studies on body cameras, 8 studies found no significant decrease in use of force incidents, while just 6 studies found that officers were less likely to use force. And that's out of 70 studies. And most of them found
yeah.
no correlation at all.
I thought that was actually a really interesting study. But what I
Yeah.
think that's what it fails to cover is that, yeah, sure, maybe it won't help prevent these police acting brutally, but it will keep them more accountable. So
Mm-hmm.
that footage is still there, at least potentially still there. And if not, like you see now, like for example, George Floyd, his body cams are off, but people are recording. And I'm going to
Yeah.
quote Will Smith here because I love Will Smith. He says that racism isn't increasing; it's just being filmed, which I think is
Exactly. It's true.
absolutely true. Yeah,
There's more accountability. Yeah.
yeah. So I think body cams are definitely necessary. And actually, a few years ago, I was a part of the Independent Police Advisory Board, and in that panel, there was a family that came up because one of the Sarasota cops, I believe he tased a man after he was like, I think he was drunk or something, or on drugs, but either way, he started attacking these officers and they tased him. Um, but anyway, one of the family's biggest gripes were that they said we want to see the footage, but the footage wasn't there. It didn't exist because the police at that time, at least not all the police, Sarasota police specifically, didn't have those body cams. So it definitely does keep those, them more accountable for their brutalities, make sure they're held responsible.
And another part, which I brought up earlier about like the police unions and these union negotiated contracts, like the issue is even though there might be more public accountability, there's no accountability within the police offices themselves, because you see the contracts with these vague language regarding the police brutality and their actions. It leads to these complaints that are filed against the police department. They're not being investigated, and they're completely private within the department. So one solution that we could see is we could have more light being shed on this. What if all complaints against officers are made public? Then you would have more accountability, and people, even if they have these implicit biases, they would be more dissuaded from actually acting on them. And then another thing, so Vice actually did an investigation on this. Another solution would be federal oversight of departments where there's an increased rate of police brutality. And essentially, those that went through federal investigations and then were forced to adopt new policies either in their contracts or in how they act saw police shootings fall from between 27 to 35%.
Wow.
Yeah. So essentially, like the stricter policies against the use of force and improved training that are brought about by like federal oversight would actually lead to this decrease in violence. And the issue is like these investigations aren't happening very frequently. And one of the solutions that's being proposed is like automatic investigations into high police violence districts or departments. And that would act as a deterrent so that even if they're not being investigated, they would then have to make sure that people aren't acting on their biases as officers and make sure that they're not committing police brutality, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any closing remarks?
I don't want to say I don't want to be canceled, because everything I've said is like fact. It's not really my opinion. I'm not putting a spin on anything, but I just want everyone to know that if you disagree with what I'm saying, just talk to either me or Brian, and I'm sure we can have a conversation about it. Like, part of the issue with like identity politics and cancel culture is people are afraid to express their opinion, and I'm expressing my opinion, not opinion, but what I believe to be true to you, because I'm not afraid about it. But people are afraid about speaking out about what they believe because they feel they might be attacked in some sense. And I just want to dissuade people from feeling that initial urge to feel mad and then actually think about what we're saying today.
Nuggets with Drew Stoneburner. Welcome to the show, Drew Stoneburner. How are you doing today?
Doing pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing great. You can't say that you know for sure because you're not actually in that situation. This was actually in Sarasota, but there was a protest that happened. It was like 3 days ago, I think. It was 3 days ago, and it was planned to happen at like 2 p.m., something like that, whatever.
Okay.
And the people who are organizing it, the Black Lives Matter chapter here in Sarasota, on their Facebook, they basically posted and they were saying the one that's happening at 2 p.m. is not sponsored by Black Lives Matter. And not only that, I believe they also added that the people who were running that protest, they were white. And then so the Black Lives Matter people were like, this protest at 2 p.m. It's run by these white people, and we have nothing to do with it. And the way they wrote it was kind of in a harsh manner. We're gonna read this out for the people who are listening. So, Black Lives Matter Manatee Sarasota is not having a protest at 3 p.m. on Wednesday. Please stop whitewashing my chapter. Do not use my chapter name on anything. It is highly racist, and you are causing more harm than good. If you want to be an ally, learn your position first. But thinking it's okay to organize Black bodies and lead protests around a Black issue is racist and macro-aggressive. I know most of you want to support. How you can do that is by organizing your fellow white peers, learn your position as an ally, and choose Black-led protest, action, etc. to support. Any questions, DM us. So, and I think they actually continued on this a little bit more up here. Yeah, this is just the poster for it, and saying this is not a Black Lives Matter event, and this is actually their event. So, going back to what you're talking about, like, you can't understand them because you're not there, you know? So
Yeah.
it's like for people of other races, like who do want to support this movement, and having something like that come out, like do you think it's okay for like white people to like organize these kind of protests?
I do, but I also do see the Black Lives Matter Manatee protests, chapter, where they're coming from. Because it's somebody using the Black Lives Matter organization name when they're not a part of it. They're not. It's like saying, I'm selling something at Target when I'm really selling something at Walmart. It's false advertising, pretty much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Unfortunately,
Wait, hold on, let me just make sure. Okay, yeah, actually
devil's
does say Black Lives Matter. It's like it's on the side. It looks so janky. Yeah, go on, sorry.
yeah. But on the other side, I don't agree with calling white people or people of other races an ally. Like, because that means like they're separate. They're two separate entities.
Mhm.
I personally choose to believe that we're like to build solidarity. Like, we're all the same people. We're all Americans, and we're trying to change America for the best. And melanin shouldn't test with, because again, we should all be considering each other the same, regardless of melanin content, what nationality you are. We should all be just saying, like, we're Americans. We're Americans right now. And you know what? I may be reading too much into this, but the word ally just kind of seems to me like there's a separation between the two when really we should be building solidarity.
Yeah, I definitely understand where you're coming from there. I think the issue, the one like little, I'm not, well, it's not really an issue. It's more of just like, it's just a point that, and you're definitely right that we're all in America and that we're all Americans, and that should be something we should see in each other. But also, these people from other countries and other cultures or whatever, it's important to recognize that their culture, it still has meaning, it still has importance. So what I think what the Black Lives Matter doing, and like by calling these people allies, yes, it is, I think you're correct in the way that it's kind of like separating them from them and from the move, from that kind of from that movement. But they're basically saying how, you know, we're Black, we directly experience these injustices, and that, you know, maybe you won't experience that, but we're very happy that you're here to support us. And so I think that it is important to kind of make that distinction, to call them an ally.
I can definitely see where you and the chapter is coming from. Definitely, yeah, that is a very good point.
Yeah, it's just like it's a different kind of mindset,
It
because
just, I guess the way that they worded it was almost like accusatory, I guess.
their wording was kind of aggressive. Yeah.
Yeah, just a bit. But yeah, I definitely do see where you're coming from there.
Yeah, I think that probably the main reason why they were so aggressive is because they did use the Black Lives Matter thing on the
Yeah, that just
poster.
wasn't needed.
But yeah, but another thing is that, you know, Black Lives Matter, it is an organization, but also it's like, it's also just a term. So I don't know if these people put that there to say that, to mimic it.
Nobody said, like, during the civil rights movement, nobody, like, I guess, copyrighted the term civil rights during that. So
yeah. So I don't know if these guys put Black Lives Matter on the poster just to say like Black Lives Matter, or if they're saying it to be like, we're the organization. So
they definitely should have said something like, we are not affiliated with Black Lives Matter on the poster.
Yeah, that would be smart.
that I think that was the best way. Like, if they just apologized in the tweets and said, we're so sorry, we're going to change the poster, And pretty much that would have been that's how I would have, tried to fix it.
Yeah. So, just
because
going
they
back.
definitely seem like the chapter was very ready to say like, hey, it's great that you are doing this. We want you to be part of this movement, but at the same time, you can't just go around throwing our organization name, all over the place.
Yeah, that's very true. But they were making a point about it being white, about them being white, and how that specific wording of let me just pull it up just to quote it. Please stop whitewashing my chapter. And that's something that I think is really interesting, because I feel like in America, people in American culture, especially over the past like 10, 20 years, people have been taking so much from Black culture, like the hip hop, the styles, the even like some like the food or whatever. And Black culture has such an influence on what we have right now. And going back to the main point, racism is stupid.
Very, very, very true.
Yeah. And it's so interesting how like when they say like whitewashing the chapter, because I feel like when I read that, I feel something similar to that. Like, they're trying to say like, we don't want you taking what is ours.
I guess that, yeah, in that certain instance, I really do think that these people that are actively racist, a lot of people are passively racist. Like they just say like,
yeah, there's a lot of passive racism.
Kaepernick, and like that's how my view changed. I used to be one of those people that said Kaepernick by kneeling during the national anthem. I thought that was disrespectful. They disrespected soldiers. I completely strawmanned his argument. And this is how I think I've grown. I completely strawmanned his argument by saying pretty much like, you're disrespecting the flag. But in reality, he was just saying, if this flag values the police who are beating up my people more than me, why should I stand for it?
Mm-hmm.
This isn't a cry to destroy America. This is a cry to change America. And
absolutely, yeah.
That's really how now I see his actual message, and I very much agree with it.
Yeah, no, I was in a very similar place as you during. I don't even know how long ago Kaepernick was, but yeah, like 2 something years ago, and I was definitely in a very similar place when I saw that, and I think it just goes to show that there's not only there's a change in mindset, but there's also like a change in, you could say, priorities. You could say, because as you're saying, that flag does represent America, and America isn't perfect, and there has to be things that need to get changed systemically and societally for us to get better. And Kaepernick, by taking that kneel, was saying like, we got to do something, and it was peaceful, which was the big thing.
It was so peaceful,
and now people are like, okay.
Well, I mean, also a lot of people are saying, oh, I think you see that like appeal to hypocrisy pretty much, because they're provided with an alternative solution, which is
yeah,
and much rather have peaceful. And I hope that hypocrisy that people like me, who said, before, Kaepernick's just destroying what America stands for, and they're finally seeing that hypocrisy.
Yeah, I think that's one thing. People aren't intentionally
racist almost.
Yeah,
and I do recognize my privilege, because I have never had to. My mom has never had to say to me, like, okay, this is what you do when a cop pulls you over. This is what you do when your friend offers you something, because I live in a stable suburban majority white place. I live in that area. There's no need to really be aware of those things, because they're not dangers that I daily have to deal with.
Yeah, it's really sad hearing like some of how the Black parents have to like talk to their kids about, this is, always put your hand on the steering wheel, make sure you have your ID and stuff out. It's like, it's just crazy. Like they just want to live.
Yeah.
Come on. Yeah.
That's me trying to come to terms, and that's also me trying to mature my political opinion. Like, change how police deal with criminals. I would advocate for stun guns and more martial arts training.
Mm.
But that also can't go along with, a decreased funding of the enforcement, because it's much easier to buy a gun and just give it to a person than to teach them martial arts.
It is. Yeah. Guns are very effective.
Not in promoting race relations, I can tell you that.
And just like on a quick side note, like you've shot a gun before, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I still remember like the very first time I shot a gun. And first off, just like picking it up and like realizing just how like heavy it was. And then when you take that shot, like at least when like my first experience when I did that, my first thought was like, wow, like if that was a person where that target was, like they would be gone. And that's like such a scary thought to have. And like I don't know if like police or like other gun owners have that kind of like similar mentality.
It really, and I think it has a lot to do with like how the media portrays gun violence. I mean, like in movies, it takes like 5 or 6 shots to kill a guy.
Oh yeah, that is so fake.
Remember that thing from Tropic Thunder where the guy's Junior or something, and he's just flailing his arms while Viet Cong is being shot in the back.
Yeah.
He would be gone after like while he was running towards there. That scene would not actually have happened.
Yeah.
In reality, it takes like 1 or maybe 2, because if you shoot obviously in the torso. Yeah. And also it's a power dynamic, as you said. It's very much a power dynamic where one person has a much easier time of killing someone, taking their life. Yeah. Is a huge mental responsibility that should not be taken lightly. It messes with the mind. It really does. Remember the Stanford prison experiment? Yeah. Yeah. I think a second solution may just be introducing classes to not only know how to handle criminal situations, but to literally give cops a tour of their neighborhood to get to know the people, because people don't trust strangers, especially in America. We are not a very welcoming society. Yeah. But once somebody knows somebody else, they are more inclined to trust them.
That's very true.
Police officers much more effective at their jobs, because say if old Johnson across the street and the cop knows each other, then if Johnson does something wrong, the cop isn't going, the cop has a mental responsibility to say, I know this guy, I can't just kill him. Yeah. And then Johnson says, okay, I know the cop, I know that he's going to treat me well. We're pretty much like not friends, but acquaintances. We know each other.
Thank you very much for your time, Drew.
For inviting me on.
And that concludes the very first episode of Nuggets. If you've listened this far, thank you so much for your support, and I hope that in hearing different perspectives and ideas, it may have helped you think and understand more. You can find the full unedited interviews with each person on the YouTube channel for more in-depth discussion, and join us again next week where we all meet and discuss on the first Tender segment. Go follow the Instagram at NuggetsSRQ for more updates, and if you want to be featured on any future episodes. With all that being said, thank you so much for listening. Stay safe and have a great day, everyone.